this equipping today. So from two different locations, so from DC and from San Antonio, where a certain van is going soon, we have a couple of guests. So from DC, we have David French is with us. So author of Divided We Fall, senior editor of the Dispatch, and formerly of the National Review. And also we have Michael Weir with us, author of Reclaiming Hope, co-founder of the AND campaign, and who was part of Barack Obama's staff in the White House in the Office of Faith Outreach. So it is great to have both of them with us. So I'm going to ask them a few questions, and then you do Slido. Remember, KF21, in case you've forgotten. You will have your opportunity to ask questions of them. So this is a great opportunity for us. So Michael and David, welcome.
Well, thanks so much. And one quick fact check. I am in Tennessee. I stay as
so nobody is in DC.
Nobody. No, I stay as far away from DC on a routine basis as I
can. Well,
so.
Now, just for a full disclosure, I grew up in Prince George's County, Maryland, not too far from DC. There's niceness in the DMV, as they call it. Though nobody called it the DMV when I was growing up. So I don't know when the DMV acronym showed up, but there we are. Well, guys, I'm so glad you're able to be with us. And I'm going to ask a few questions before I then get the audience in on this. So David, we'll start with you, and then Michael, you can answer this as well. How would each of you describe what is happening in politics right now that is constructive and encouraging? In other words, where do you see things going right? Where there's an upward trending arrow, if you will, even if that upward is like 5 degrees?
I'll start with the idea that there is a hunger for reason. There is a hunger for something different than the hyper-polarized sort of the catastrophism of lots of modern political discourse. Everywhere I go, I find people who say, who can I read that's reasonable? What can I watch that's reasonable? So there is, and this is actually a group of Americans that has been studied and identified in some pretty rigorous research, and that is, they're called the exhausted majority. And these are the Americans. They're on the right, they're on the left, they're on the middle. So it's not just the moderates who believe we can do better and think that the way politics is moving is too toxic, it's too angry, it's too rage-filled. And so there is a critical mass of Americans who want something better. And since you said the good news, I won't really harp on the bad news that the really operative word in the phrase exhausted majority is exhausted and not majority.
Right.
So we'll just leave that. We'll leave that for later.
One question about the exhaustive majority before we get to Michael, and that is there something that the exhaustive majority agrees upon? In other words, you've got them in a room together. What is there something that they agree upon, even though they are a mixed group of people?
Yeah, there are a few things that the exhausted majority agrees upon. One is that essentially that this is the times are just too toxic. They're fed up. So there's 4 things that the research shows, and I'm cribbing from this really indispensable hidden tribe study of American polarization from a group called More in Common. 1, they're fed up with polarization. Number 2, they're forgotten. They feel forgotten. They're overlooked. Because people aren't hearing their voices. Number 3, they're while they might be left, middle, or right, they're kind of flexible in their views, and they'll endorse different policies according to a precise situation, rather than sticking ideologically to a single sort of whole. And they also believe we can find common ground. So those are people on the left, and the middle, and the right, and they share those 4 characteristics.
Oh, great, thank you, Michael.
Yeah. Well, first, it's really a pleasure to be with you all, to be with David, to be with you, Vince, but then to have the opportunity to speak to all of you and have a conversation with all of you in the audience. I think, so I do think that there are good and bad sides to what David outlined. What I'll throw into the mix is that we we are in a period of civic interest. And I think we're seeing an upswing in Americans who believe that they have a responsibility to the public, to our civic life. Now, the direction in which that is, the way in which those affections and that energy is directed will determine just how good it is. But a commitment to and a recognition of the fact that our politics matter, that political decisions and our political culture affect us, and that we have a duty to be involved. That's on the upswing, and I think that there's a lot of positive local civic engagement that I see that we can build on. But with all of these sort of positive trends, there are dark sides, and maybe we'll even talk about some of the brighter sides of some of what we perceive to be dark trends. There is, well, yeah, I was about to go negative, but I think we'll have time for that. So I'll end there.
Okay, all right, thanks. So second question, what do you see as, and maybe this is some of the dark side part, Michael, so we'll start with you in this one. What do you see as the major reasons politics is facing such tough problems right now?
Yeah, well, so we could talk about structural finance, campaign finance reform, the way our elections work. We could talk about that all day, but and we should. Those things are important. The real hard truth that we need to come to terms with is that the state of our politics is in some fundamental way a reflection of the state of our souls. That our politics is a reflection of who we are. And if we can't come to terms with that, then all the ways in which we might try and seek and address sort of systemic reforms will fall way short. We are going to politics generally as a people. We are going to politics as a forum for self-expression and self-aggrandizement. Politics has become a sort of reservoir for all of our hatreds and loves and aspirations and animosities. And politics is not meant to bear that weight. It can't bear that weight. And what happens is when we go to politics for those reasons, it actually crowds out our ability to go to politics for its limited purposes of affirming human dignity, advancing justice. And that's what we see right now. We see a political culture that is saturating not just sort of the political system proper, but as we see in our churches, in our communities, increasingly the toxic political culture that we have, a culture that is based on what social scientists at the end of 2020 wrote a really brief essay I would encourage folks to read. It's succinct, it really, they describe the particular kind of political polarization we have today as political sectarianism. And really they describe three pillars that hold up this political sectarianism. Othering, the othering of people not like you, aversion and aversion towards others, and then what they call moralism, and I call a misplaced moralism. I have no problem with moralism, it just better be in the right place. And what they identify as a really misplaced moralism. The good news, of course, is that Christianity offers tremendous resources to push back on misplaced moralism, on aversion and othering. One of the problems I see is a lack of confidence among Christians that Christian resources, that the way of Jesus actually holds up in public life, that Jesus is competent in public things, not just our personal finances and the way we treat our spouses and that kind of thing. And unless we understand, as you've led the way so well on, Vince, that political discipleship in a context like ours, where as citizens we are all political, not by choice, but by the fact that we're citizens, political discipleship is central to discipleship.
Right.
End sentence, period. And so hopefully we'll talk about that.
So can you give us where to find that article?
Yeah, if you search political sectarianism,
Okay.
it was, it's been published in a number of places, but
Okay.
Stanford has probably the easiest. So if you just search political sectarianism, you'll be able to find it pretty easily.
All right. Thanks a lot, David.
I think that this concept of political sectarianism is really, it's a vital concept, because what we're learning for an awful lot of people is that when push comes to shove, politics is the religion and religion is the hobby. And so what we're beginning to see, and we're often finding in this in the most kind of direct way possible, which is you're suddenly realizing that maybe even your friendships, maybe even memberships in church are contingent more upon political affiliation than on theology or adherence to small o orthodoxy. And so that's a real rubber meets the road kind of position. One of the things, when I think of one of the sort of the best C.S. Lewis quotes, and it's sort of hard to choose from them all, one is that courage is the form of every virtue at its testing point. And I've kind of extrapolated out from that is, we don't really know who we really are until things are tested. If everyone in your church or all in your circle at church believes both Jesus is Lord and person X should be president, we don't know which of those two beliefs really is the thing that unifies us until that's tested. And what we began to see, I think, a lot in the church is that a lot of the things that we thought were sort of consensus ideas, and it wasn't just about politics. It could be something about masks. It could be about police violence. It could be about race. It could be about, you name it. As soon as some of those underlying points of agreement began to fracture, the superstructure itself began to fracture, because those underlying points of agreement were actually more vital to us than some of the things that we would intellectually say were the most important. It turned out that emotionally they were not. And that emotionally, what we thought was less important was actually much greater importance to us. Because if you put even, say, a Christian nationalist patriot church pastor under a polygraph, they would say Jesus is more important than America. And they'd pass the polygraph, right? But one of the elements of Christian nationalism isn't so much a set of theological beliefs as much as it is an emotional, visceral commitment. And I think that's a formulation that Thomas Kidd used, which I think is incredibly helpful, not just in discerning, say, the Christian nationalist kind of mindset, but any sort of political mindset that begins to trump our abstract, sort of intellectually possessed theology. It's where are you here in your heart that ultimately dictates where you ultimately go here in your head.
So just one quick follow-up to that, because I've heard a lot of people talk about that dimension. And one of the things I wonder is, let's just talk about, in at least a good sense, sort of, that word evangelical. And what I mean is this: if you ask, quote unquote, the garden variety evangelical, what do you trust the most for your authority, right? Then, is the triune God and the Bible.
Right.
What is it that, and when they say that, they're probably thinking that, and that includes that emotional commitment.
Right.
Where's the disconnect with what they're saying and the fact that actually, again, at the testing shows that, well, your emotional commitment seems to be more to certain other things. And it's at least a parallel commitment to purportedly the Bible and God, or maybe even it's above that.
I think the asking is irrelevant at this point. I think the asking is irrelevant. What is relevant are ultimately what flows out of us, at times of testing. That's what's really relevant. Now, maybe I'm overstating to say it's irrelevant. If you articulate a commitment to an idea, sometimes that does have some sort of hold on you that I feel like I need to follow through on the things that I've said, although recent history is littered with examples of people finding very clever ways to kind of wriggle out of some very clear statements from the past. And so even that, it doesn't have that much of a hold. You know, I served in Iraq during the surge, and there's this movie cliche of sort of the barracks warrior, that when the bullets start flying, that they're nowhere to be seen, and somehow, you know, maybe the more quiet person rises to the occasion. Well, you know, I saw that's a real phenomenon. That's a real phenomenon. There are people who envision themselves one way, and that when it really gets tough, turn out to be something else entirely. And for me, you know, having seen that in war zones, for example, having seen that in the way people approach politics, it's profoundly humbling. It's very humbling. I mean, you start to think, how do I envision myself? And how am I really? And it really, I think it makes you want to go to the foot of the cross and say, Lord, give me the strength. Give me the strength, because what I think about myself might not be myself when the chips are down.
Okay.
Yeah.
Helpful.
Can
Go
I-
ahead. Yeah, go
can
ahead.
I- Yeah, let me add a couple things. So two pieces. One, you know, Dallas Willard wrote in the late 90s that evangelical theology is developed in such a way that you could be the worst kind of person possible, but so long as you provide mental assent to the right ideas, you'll end up in the good place and not the bad place. And I think there was some really keen insight that Willard had. He referred to what he called barcode faith, the idea that so long as you had the right label, it didn't matter what was in the package. The scanner, the sort of divine scanner would see that you have the right barcode on, and you'd be in. And that's what the Christian life is about getting to the good place. And so everything else is sort of debatable and negotiable. The second thing, you know, I think we've, I think that it's become. I want to say this.
You don't have to be diplomatic.
Yeah. So you know, I think that we've. It's interesting the ways in which we've imbibed exactly the secular narratives that we say in our minds that we reject. You know, John Kennedy is sort of put in front of the Houston Baptist Ministerial Alliance in one of the great ironies of history by evangelicals to say that he will not allow his faith to influence his politics whatsoever. And the ripple effects of that through history, both for Catholics and the message that sent about, well, when the rubber really meets the road, it's other resources we must draw on, because religious resources are for the personal and the moral, and we need to rely on other sets of knowledge for the really practical work of politics. We have not come to terms with the extent to which that dominates the evangelical mind, the ways in which the evangelical mind has become secularized and in some unhelpful ways.
Right. You know, interesting observation about that is that, I mean, it really is the bifurcation of theology and ethics, right? I mean, you have an ad hoc relationship between what you confess, and then you kind of make it up as you go along with the way you're actually living and draw on those other resources. So it is this interesting, unfortunate irony. Next question. You've proven that it's possible, both of you have proven it's possible to participate in politics without losing Christian integrity. What's made that possible for you? Are there principles or practices you want to commend? Since I'm looking at you, Michael, you can start.
Yeah, sure. So a few things. First, being grounded in a local church, and being grounded in Christian community that is not a political, that is not a community that is synonymous with your political community. I mean, it's really important to go to be going to a church with folks that have different approaches to politics, but you're worshiping the same God. The disciplines of solitude and silence are really important to help us come to terms with and push back against the ways our media narratives and just the rut of thinking that we get into. We get carried along by streams that we don't even know we're in the water, and solitude and silence can help break that hold on us. I think the third thing is, our media and technological habits, the ways in which the sources of media we go to, our inability to unplug. Folks don't understand the sophistication of political technology to reach into our psyches more than ever in a personalized way. And so if you aren't intentionally pushing back against that, then you will find that you're being shaped more and more by sources that you're not even consciously sort of understanding that they're feeding in. And then, from my experience, actually, being in politics, it was really important for me to invite people who disagreed with me politically, that I trusted as brothers and sisters, to hold me accountable in terms of my public presence. And so, just a quick story: when I took a campaign role in 2012, I had seen the way these roles had played out in the past. And when you're doing faith outreach for a candidate, the easiest thing to do, the most direct line to getting support for that candidate, is to say, if you are a real Christian, you will vote for my candidate. Or the Christian thing, my candidate is the Christian candidate. And I was really dead set against falling into that trap. And so right when I got the role, I asked 6 Republican friends of mine to hop on a conference call with me every week. And I said, I'm not responsible for everything that comes out of this campaign, but for things that come out of my shop, I want you to hold me accountable, that my job is to make the best case that I can for the candidate I'm working for. That's like, everyone understands that that's my role. But I want you to hold me accountable for not what C.S. Lewis said. C.S. Lewis has this essay, Meditations on the Third Commandment, and he says that really the greatest temptation when we combine faith and politics is to proclaim God hath said when he hasn't spoken, to say this is God's position on a prudential issue when God has not spoken that clearly. And so when it comes to politics, when it comes to campaigns, wanting to be really careful to offer space for difference, for different faithful approaches to an issue or an election. And I'll just quickly add, I've been very clear, and people have been very upset with me for insisting, even weeks out in a national op-ed before the election, for saying that I don't believe that supporting Trump was a sin or a lack of faithfulness, that a vote for Trump was inherently, but that's where our politics goes. It's not you're voting for the wrong guy. It's not I disagree with your approach here. The easiest way is you have betrayed God if you vote for a different candidate than I did. And it's just, it is more complicated than that. And it has to be more complicated than that in how we communicate.
David?
I just completely echo what Michael said about grounding yourself in a local church, accountability with people and with friends and pastors who are not deeply involved in politics. Being able to have that check on yourself that's outside the bubble. I think that political bubble and that political sort of hothouse environment is really, really, really important. Being deeply connected in a local church is very, very important. And I've seen too many people who get very focused on politics. It's almost as if they become kind of a rootless person in a way. They're traveling so much, they're going in so many different directions, attending so many different conferences that they're not really rooted anywhere. And I think that gets very, very dangerous. And then I think in the online world, if you are somebody who's really interested in these topics, and I'm not even going to presume that everybody in the audience is really interested in these topics, but if you are somebody who's really interested in politics, I have a couple of rules of thumb that I apply that really help me a lot. One is, to the extent that I'm on social media, unfortunately, I'm on social media to a great extent, but when I'm on social media, I try to follow about roughly equal numbers of people in different political camps so that I'm getting a good sense of where thoughtful people are across the spectrum. So I'm trying hard to break the bubble. Number two is that I will always try to read new ideas or new thoughts from the proponents of the ideas and not the opponent of the idea. So for example, just to take a hot button issue that's burning, it's not new, but it's new to a lot of people, CRT. A lot of people sort of have pre-existing go-to commentators that they really like if they're on the left or on the right. So they'll hear of a new thing and they'll say, oh, I wonder what National Review says about CRT. Totally worth reading National Review on CRT. But if the first you're hearing of CRT is, I'm going to say, go to somebody who advocates CRT and read that first, then read the critique. It's a great way of sort of getting the best expression of the view before you learn the criticism of the view, because very few criticisms are completely fair in casting what a belief system is. And then, the other thing that I would say is, you absolutely, and this is especially true for pastors, less so for, say, somebody like me who is a legal commentator in addition to sort of talking about religion and culture. You don't have to feel like you have to know everything about everything. A pastor does not, as much as a congregation might be pushing a pastor in this direction, you don't have to know everything about mRNA vaccines. You don't have to know everything about qualified immunity and police brutality. You don't have to know everything about everything. That you can't do it in addition to pastoring a church, in addition to being there for the sick and being there for people who are going through a crisis in their marriage and their business. But what are pastors good at? Well, they're good at heart formation. How is it that we approach these questions? And we so skip over that so much. We go straight to the answer. What's the answer on mRNA vaccines? How safe are they? Pastor. What? I mean, I couldn't imagine being a pastor and all of a sudden having to become an expert in epidemiology and masks, becoming an expert in mRNA vaccines, becoming an expert in election law in 50 states, and becoming an expert in police reform, all in 9 months, while I am shepherding a flock that is going through health challenges, economic challenges. We had record drug overdoses. And I would say liberate yourself from the sense that you have to have the answer to all of the outcomes. That what you're good at and what is your training and what you're so good at is at your best is what is the condition of my heart as I approach these incredibly difficult concepts, imbibing, what does it mean to not have a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of sound mind? What does it mean to approach politics where we're to act justly? Yes, but also to love mercy and to walk humbly. To me, that's wheelhouse pastoral stuff. Whereas I'm much less interested in sort of where you come down on, this or that policy reform idea, or even this or that candidate.
Great. So
It's tremendously
okay, go ahead, Michael.
It's tremendously important what David just shared. And I think a lot of pastors are getting these emails saying, you have a moral responsibility to speak out. One of my favorite cases of this, or I think one of the ones that really show me how pervasive and destructive this had been is during the healthcare debates during the Trump administration. I remember seeing a Christian say, if your pastor does not preach on the motion to proceed vote to overcome, you need to leave that church. And I thought, well, first of all, who knows what a motion to proceed vote is? Second of all, the whole point is if the motion to proceed vote passes, they need to actually vote on the thing. So now we're talking about pastors needing to teach entire series on healthcare reform in order to meet this person's standards. And what I try to remind pastors is it is very rare that you are being asked to speak about a policy issue by someone who is just so eager to hear and follow what you have to say. The more likely situation is that you are being asked to make a pronouncement from the pulpit, typically, on an issue so that that person can tell Bob on the other end of the pew who they've been fighting about the issue. Well, now pastor has spoken, so you better get in line. And so I would really I think what David shared about sort of the prudentiality of politics, making sure you're guarding the. It can get very confusing for congregations if they're hearing their pastor pronounce prudential political judgments from the same pulpit from which they read the gospel. And one of two things can happen. They can start to take the pastor's political pronouncements as seriously as they take their reading of the gospel, or they could say, well, I don't agree with the pastor's political view, so maybe he's just as wrong about the gospel. So it's very important to not be swept up in sort of some of this church activism that's happening.
Yeah, and one thing, and that just to piggyback on that, so there are certain areas where, I'm by no means expert in everything, but there's certain areas that I concentrate my work on and have concentrated my education. And every now and then I'll see a pastor, whether it's a pastor online or a pastor somewhere, start to opine authoritatively in areas where I have a lot of granular knowledge. And often it's like, no, stop, please stop, no. You're not, even if you might be directionally in what I would consider to be going in the right direction, often there's so much nuance and so, many complexities that this sort of policy authoritativeness becomes discrediting. This purported policy authoritativeness becomes discrediting. And just to really emphasize what Michael said, and anytime you say something, and I'm keenly aware of this, anytime you say something where someone who's listening, who's an expert in the arena, says, "You're off base there, dude," you realize you've just undermined everything you do. And that's one reason why I will, I do a legal podcast, for example, and we talk about a lot of different things. And I will preface what I'm saying by saying this: I'm not an antitrust lawyer, so I'm really looking forward to antitrust lawyers filling in the gaps here, but here are some general principles, and so even leading with humility in that regard can be incredibly important, but be very careful about a policy authoritativeness just be careful.